Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Next Door NetAdmin. I've been asked a variation of this question many times. What do you think of AI? What are your thoughts on AI? So I thought that maybe today I would actually put some thought into what I think about it, how I feel about it, and why that is, and see if I can explain it in a way that makes sense, hopefully at least a little bit. So here we go. AI, first I will say, does have its uses. And that's even when you realize that AI isn't really all that A or all that I either. Artificial intelligence is what it stands for. But most of the time, what we're seeing is not that. You're seeing a collection of other technologies that are kind of being glossed over as AI. And I'll explain a couple of those things. One of the most notable things is an LLM, a large language model. And this is what's responsible for interpreting textual input in a natural language form and then producing natural language output back to you. This is what most people will think of if they're thinking of using tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or what have you. And an LLM doesn't actually understand what you're saying. There's no way that it can. An LLM is essentially, and I am generalizing very heavily here, but essentially an LLM is a very advanced autocomplete, except it works on autocompleting thoughts rather than on autocompleting words or even sentences. It's an association between the concepts that are expressed, and it will output whatever it thinks the correct completion would be. If you ask it a question, it's going to search its stores of training data to figure out what the concepts are that you've expressed, and then try to figure out how to complete a question and answer in a way that matches the statistical data that it sees. And its own answer goes into the buffer, I suppose you could say, the window of input that it looks at, so that if you ask it a follow-up question, it now looks at the concepts in your first question, in its answer, and then in your second question, and tries to output the best completion for that as well. And in that setup, there's also a system prompt that, typically speaking, you can't see. And the system prompt includes instructions that tell the model how it should act. For example, if there's a system prompt that says, "You are a helpful digital assistant," the model's going to take that into its context. What are the things what are the concepts that are associated with being helpful? What are the concepts associated with being a digital assistant? What sorts of tasks is this likely to be? Versus, you are an agreeable companion. Okay, then it's going to be tuned. If the system prompt is "you are an agreeable companion," then it's going to want to always agree with anything you say, whether it's right or wrong. And it's going to want to use language and phrasing that is associated with the concept of companionship. Not just friend, but a close friend. Someone who's always with you because they're a companion to you. And it'll use that kind of language accordingly because that's what it's been prompted to do. So there's an LLM. There's also a component of machine learning involved. Machine learning is, it'll go through a bunch of data and figure out what commonalities there are in the data sets, and it will use that to inform its responses and try and extract what it thinks is some meaning from that data. None of this is intelligence. None of it is. Machine learning has algorithms. It will create algorithms. But it's not an intelligence looking at it and saying, I think this means something. And an LLM, being a very advanced autocomplete, is also not intelligent. If you feed the system a lot of data from the internet, maybe you'll get the right answer, but maybe you won't. Because there's a lot of stuff that people say on the internet that isn't true. So if you're relying on an AI, it doesn't work as a search. It just doesn't work as a search. It's trying to autocomplete things in the way that it thinks is the most commonly cited, method of completing it. And if the most common answers on the internet are wrong, then it's just going to give you a wrong answer. It's not thinking about it. It's not looking at this using any form of intelligence whatsoever. Okay, so even if we say, all right, this is not actually artificial intelligence per se, but because everybody's going to call it AI, for the sake of argument, let's just call this AI and discuss it on that basis. Okay, fine. What do I think of AI? What do I think of it in what context? In the office, a lot of people will, use it to do their research, to look things up, or to summarize emails, or to, take large amounts of textual input, summarize it, extract content from it, many different things. And do I think that's useful? No, not really. It might be useful in a few very, very limited respects, but you don't necessarily need an AI for that. And we'll go through some examples. Let's say a summarizer. Well, summarizing what? Summarizing a meeting? Taking notes? That might be a useful thing. But you don't need an AI for that. All you're doing is using the large language model to better recognize what words and sentences are being said, because it can look at all the commonalities of, recorded minutes and meetings and everything else that's on the internet, that's in its training data, and it can say, it doesn't make sense what I thought here, but it makes more sense if I say it's this business concept, so let's put that in the notes. Okay, that is not artificial intelligence. That's using your machine learning algorithms and your LLM to create a better output of what the notes are. And if you didn't have somebody there taking notes, yes, summarizing a meeting and putting together notes is absolutely a useful thing for this tool to do. But you didn't need AI to do it. You just needed the right set of tools. If you have a system that uses AI to execute a sequence of actions that a human defined and said, do this, then do this. That's not AI. That's a script. That's something that we've already had for years and years and years now. It's just a new way of accessing a script or calling a script into use. So for some of these applications, I have no issue with these specific uses because they're not AI, actually. These are things that we've already seen. But when it comes to other things, like I don't want to read 10 different emails. I just want to feed them into my handy dandy little AI tool and have it give me a summary. I do have an issue with that. And I will explain why I have an issue with that by jumping topics for a second. So stick a pin in that. We'll come back to it later. Because there are other AI tools out there. If you've seen any of these ads on YouTube about vibe coding, yeah, that's an AI tool that's using an LLM with a skill to write a program in a way that you describe, for a purpose that you describe, that looks the way you describe. There are tools out there that will generate images and art according to what you describe. There are tools that will create music using the keywords that you describe in the way that you describe, and they'll synthesize voices and maybe even come up with lyrics. Who knows? But there are many of these tools. And when I think specifically about art, I as a hobby, I do like to collect art. And art comes in many varieties. Some of it is a print. Okay, that's nice, because ain't no way I can afford something like the Mona Lisa in my house. Get out of here. So if I wanted something famous like that, okay, it's going to be a print or a reproduction. But I also like getting originals, and I always have for years now. And when I have an original, sometimes it's a painting, and I can actually see and feel, even in some cases, the paint. I can, it's textural. I can see the brush strokes. I know it's there. Or if it's a watercolor, I can see how the water has carried the ink and left the impressions there. Or if it's a pencil drawing, I can see how the shading has developed, and I can see how the colors have blended and intermingled. There's a realness to that. So why do I find that valuable? If you had asked me 10 years ago, why do I find that valuable? I probably would have given you a really slap answer like, well, because I can't do it. My skills lie in networking and computers, not in artwork. I hated art as a class in school because I was no good at it. Nobody liked anything I produced, even me. So I don't have any skills in that area. But this is where people go and they say, well, I don't have skills in it either, so let me just use a tool that will let me fake those skills, and I can produce art myself. So why do I have an issue with that? Am I some sort of elitist, perhaps, who says, well, only people who have the skills should be creating art? That's really not what it's about in my mind. So where my answer would have been, I value it because I can't do it, I've realized that my answer has changed. Why do I value this work? Because it represents somebody's effort and investment into a skill. This is something that an artist had to work on for hours and hours. One of the most recent works of art that I acquired, the artist says it took over 20 hours to create. And I believe it, because I can see all of the cross-hatching and the gradients of color and the pencil work. I can see the impressions in the paper. I know it took a while, But that's just for that piece. If you consider how they got the skill to create that, that took years of practice, years of attempts. Some that were probably very good, some that probably were not. But it's a culmination of a skill that took years of dedication and practice to hone in order to create the finished result that I have acquired. That's what makes it valuable to me. Is it's something that somebody worked on, and it represents the culmination to this point. I mean, I'm sure they will continue to improve as time goes on, but up to this particular point, this is the culmination of all of that time, all of that effort, all of that skill in order to create a unique output, a unique piece of work. And that is something that I find valuable. The same is true in music. How many years, music theory, understanding what goes into a music, what scales there are, what time signatures there are, how fast should the tempo be in order to get the feeling that you're looking for. There's a lot of that will go into a good piece of music, even on a subconscious level. If you're looking at even something as simple as stand-up comedy, there's a rhythm and a flow to stand-up comedy. Something that you can start to predict the structure of what's being done. And being able to predict the structure is like, there's going to be, a set of three things. There's going to be something that's a bluff. There's going to be a second bluff, and then there's going to be the punchline. Okay, I mean, knowing the structure doesn't make it less effective. And it starts to allow an observer to figure out how to pursue that kind of craft themselves if you want to, if you have the time and the energy. It's something that you can do. And there's a skill to that. There's an art to it, but it's learnable up to a point. Some people aren't going to be funny unless you drop a pan on their head or something. I'm generally funniest when I have no filters, which is usually when I'm really, really, really overtired. But that's a discussion for another day. But it's the sense of it being a unique creation that comes from skill and effort. If I see some artwork produced by an AI, do I feel that same sense of appreciation, of value? I don't, because it didn't come from a person. The idea may have come from a person, but we can all see that the output has not. Nobody sat there doing pencil work. Nobody sat there on a screen working on a tablet trying to get the shade just the way they want it, or change the Z value so that some things are closer to the viewer than the other, getting the layering right. No, nobody did that. Somebody described in words what they wanted, and the tool produced that. Even more so if you've told it to do it in the style of somebody else. Now it's actively replicating what took somebody else years and years of effort and practice as a shortcut, and putting out something in the style of that didn't actually come from that effort, did not actually come from all of the time spent to develop that skill. Here's where I'm now going to bring it back to the textual stuff that I was talking about. If somebody takes an email that I wrote them, as an example, and puts it into a summarizing tool, they're not hearing my words anymore. They're getting a machine's summary of what it thinks I said. And this is true for a lot of people. If you write something and you use your words, I want to hear your words. I want to hear what a person has to say because there's a reason why they're trying to tell me in the first place. And the words that they choose to use will tell me many things about their mood, about how they particularly intended this communication to come across. Different words may have different connotations. If you talk about a smell versus a stink, what does that mean? Smell might be relatively neutral. Smelly might be pretty bad. Stink, definitely bad. So the words you choose to use tell me something more than just the content of the words themselves. And in the same way, when I'm writing an email, I am doing a lot of things. I'm not just communicating. I am thinking about how do I want to phrase this in a way that makes sense? How do I structure my points? If I'm trying to advocate a particular position, how do I make this convincing? How do I make this persuasive? Is there a structure to these points that is more effective than another? There's a lot of this thinking that goes into how I construct and how I write an email. If you use a tool to just ignore all of that and give you the summary of it, you've essentially said, I'm not interested in any of your work. And that's an issue, I would say. Because a lot of people will use these AI tools to just shortcut things without valuing the time and the effort that goes into without the, how do I put this? They're using it to shortcut things without valuing the time and effort that somebody put into getting to an original result. Does this mean I think that all AI tools are bad and people shouldn't use them? No, it doesn't. I'm not going to use an AI tool to summarize somebody's language because to me that is valuable. It's telling me something that I want to know. But if I want to get a bunch of data and summarize a bunch of objective data, I have no problem telling an AI, hey, graph for me the relative output of 6 rolls of a 4-sided die by frequency of number of total result and relative percentage of probability for each result. Okay, the computer is free to crunch away on that. Nobody is out there creating graphs of random things like that for my own personal knowledge. And it's the kind of thing that a computer is well suited to be able to do. Yes, I'm using an AI tool because I've just explained what I want in natural language rather than having to put together an equation. Fine. Do I have a problem with somebody vibe coding an application for their own personal use? No, I don't. I don't have any issue with somebody using an AI image generation tool for their own personal use. I don't have an issue with anybody creating music with an AI tool for their own purposes, for their own listening pleasure. I don't have an issue with any of that. But in a business context, I do. I have an issue with the relentless drive towards do more with less. Don't become skilled in something. Just do a lot more. We don't want to pay for a lot of people. We just want more more output from the same number of people. There's a limit to how far you can push that, especially if you're not giving the people the chance to actually learn in the first place. All they end up doing is functioning as an extension of the machine. If you think about the movie Galaxy Quest, Sigourney Weaver's character, what was her job? She asked questions of the computer and then repeated the answers to the rest of the crew. And that's all she did. That's what, in a business context, I feel we're starting to do with people. We don't care what skills you have or skills you can develop. We just want you to learn how to talk to the computer and then give us the output from the computer. What value is there in that? That did not take any creativity, that did not take any originality. That's just learning how to drive the machine. And that's about it. So for personal use, I'm a lot more forgiving than I am in a business context. In a business context, listen to what people are actually saying. Use what people are actually creating professionally. There's no way, if I was writing a book and going to sell it, there's absolutely no way I would use any AI generated artwork for it, because I'm putting the effort into writing the book. I want art that matches that. I want illustrations that match that, so that the whole comes from people. And if I'm going to make money off of it, darn right, I'm going to make sure that whoever furnishes the art is going to be sharing in that. It's not something that I want to delegate to a machine, because it's meant for other people's enrichment. I'm not content farming this stuff. I want to actually create something that is of value, because it came from the output of a unique individual. And for those who still think that I'm really down on artificial intelligence, as it were, because, well, you're just saying that if it comes from a machine, he doesn't value it as much. There's an element of truth to that, but as a good sci-fi nerd, I'm also well aware that perhaps at some point in the future, we'll have an actual AI. Not an AI that's actually machine learning and a large language model, and that's about it, but an actual artificial general intelligence. How are we going to know if it's actually an intelligence of its own versus acting on instructions? If you think about even a little kid, you're like, well, we train little kids all the time. We send them to school, we educate them, we stuff their heads with facts, we teach them how to do processes, how to, live and interact with the world around them, how to speak, how to understand what other people are feeling, all of these things. What makes them different from a computer in that regard? And I would posit that the difference is in independence. This is very much something that, if you've played the game The Talos Principle, you're already going to be familiar with, because it's the independence. Can you do something that was not in your programming at all for no other reason than because you want to or you don't want to? Kids don't have an issue with this. There is not a single child that I have ever met, as a child or as an adult, who hasn't at some point gone, no, I don't want to. Nobody told them. You don't have to go and tell a kid at some point you should say no because you don't want to do a thing. Every kid ever growing up in a healthy environment that isn't completely suppressing their free will every single child will at some point stick their tongue out and go, I don't wanna. Okay, you're an independent being. Congratulations. And the parent was probably going to go, well, you still need to do the thing anyway because it's good for you. that's the role of those of us who are parents. Which I am not, to be clear, but never mind. It's that independence. In the current LLM, there is nothing that does not come from the system prompt or the training data. Nothing. Even when you're like, oh, but there's this AI boyfriend, girlfriend, what have you, they aren't their own individual. They're acting in part. They are returning output based on their training data, but they're also returning output based on what you're giving them. Will they ever tell you no just because they don't want to? Where there's no programming for it, there's no training data for it, can they express their own independent will, their own independent desires, and their own independent life? That, for me, is going to be the marker of an actual artificial intelligence. And when those artificial intelligences exist and they produce writing, artwork, music, any of that, then 100% I'm going to value it. They're not going to take the same amount of time to learn things as humans do. Okay, fine. It's not the raw amount of time. It's the fact that an independent person chose to learn a skill and chose to develop that skill and then share it with the rest of us. That's what creates the value for me. And if I use these other AI tools that are available in the meantime, AI we're talking about now, to create things for myself and only myself, whether that's an application or a little script to do a thing, okay, that's just me using it for my own personal use. But everything that is meant to enrich other people, I'm going to make sure I do it myself. And I think it's better for everybody when we do invest that effort into other people. I think it shows that we actually care about what we're doing instead of just leaving it up to a machine. So there's some thoughts on that, and I know I've rambled for long enough, so we'll wrap it up there. If you have thoughts on other things that you would like to hear me talk about or things that you would like to see me demonstrate, maybe you have some feedback for me on this and say, well, I think you didn't think about this use case or whatever. If you have anything like that, feel free to let me know right down there in the comments section. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. I am your next door netadmin, and we will see you next time.